welcome to the, let me make sure I'm on. Welcome to the June 17th Board Business Meeting and Study Session. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. All board members are present. All board directors are present. Open forum, I don't believe there are any open forum. Okay, so we're going to go ahead to the approval of the agenda. I need a first and a second motion
So made.
by Director Crosby,
Second.
second by Director Olstad. All in favor of the agenda? Aye. That passes 7-0. Okay, the first item on our agenda is the levy final draft. This is something that is going to be presented to the board in July for a vote. Right now, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Thomas and for further discussion based upon our discussion last week Monday.
Thank you, Chair Franz and Board and Directors. This evening, based upon the feedback that we received during our discussion last week, we're prepared to give you some additional conversations around the financial scenarios, some of the forecasting scenarios as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Director Frederickson, who will walk us through some of those key conversation areas.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, Board Chair. We have updated the 5 different scenarios with the, you approved the budget for 24-25 at our last meeting. So we've updated those 5 scenarios to reflect the revenue and expenses. You'll see that there really isn't, the trajectory is the same on all the scenarios, it's just updated numbers. So we're going to continue to make the recommendations of either 30, 45, we've shown the $60, and if we do nothing. So if you have questions on those, I'm happy to answer those.
Does anybody have any question on that so far?
I just have one question on the funding. What percentage are you using for the funding? I know there was some discussion at a previous meeting about different funding. What's that?
The formula allowance?
No, the formula.
3%.
I'm sorry, for which formula?
For the revenue. So like how much money are we getting, are you projecting that we get from the state? Like what are you projecting in that number? I mean, I know that's hard to you know, anticipate what we're going to get in the future from the state. So I was just curious, how do you project that in your 5-year scenario?
So I know what all of the levy items are in the levy. I believe I presented this several times. I've done a fiscal year revenue projection. I've broken it down to here's the state aids, here's the levies. I've got all the formulas in there. That's what I use. You update the formulas. I'm assuming that the legislative amount for the formula allowance has a cap of 3%. I use 3%. I don't think it's going to be 3%, but for the sake of the analysis, I used a 3% cap. Again, it'll be based on whatever the legislature or the state decides what the inflation factor is. And then everything else is all formula-based in statute. So those are the numbers that I've used for all of the revenue.
Yeah, that's the clarification I was looking for. Thank you for answering that. And then I have another question. On the last page, the ADM estimate, so you're showing declining enrollment, basically,
Correct.
which would show less revenue, correct?
Correct.
So can you help me understand for the 24-25 year, you had mentioned you're using 8,700 students for that budget, but on here it shows 8,593.
I think we've used 8,500. that's, I believe the revenue projections that I presented before had the 8,500. I think that's where we, again, we'll look at the enrollment numbers in September when we actually get the enrollment, but right now we're trending down. We're still short of what we're projecting, so.
Yeah, I just recall you saying 8,700 and that we'll get the students, that they'll come. So that's when I saw the number, I was a little surprised to see the 8,593, so.
I think that's the enrollment report that I presented last board meeting showed that we were right around 8,500, which is down from what we were last year. And that trend looks like it's continuing.
Okay.
And then in 2 years, when our seniors graduate, we'll be continually going down.
Yeah, I
Because that's
do
our
re-
biggest senior class.
I do recall that, and I appreciate it. I remember asking the question if the budget was based on 8,700, and I thought you said that it was. So I was just trying to understand the difference, so thank you. The forecasts are very helpful, thank you.
Well, again, what we presented last week, we haven't really made much updates to it. It continues to, if there's particular slides that you'd like me to go through, I certainly can answer any questions. Again, our recommendation, as we looked at the different scenarios, and we're looking at the $45 option. We could certainly talk about a $30 option. And if there's specific questions, we're happy to address them.
All right, I know you've received quite a few questions over email. I know I've sent a few and had a few conversations. Are there any other questions on these numbers? We did go over them in a lot of detail and remember in July.
I have one question.
Okay, thank you.
Tammy, I'm looking at the presentation on page 8, the budget reduction slide. I think it says page 8 on my board book. It has the down arrow with the 6 million. It says since 2019-20, we've used approximately 5 million in fund balance to present a balanced budget to the school board. And then for the 24-25 school year, we will cut approximately 4 million from our budget and utilize fund balance to cover increased costs. I know you've shared that with the board consistently. My question is on the graphic with the 6, because I'm like, I don't remember the 6. So that just confused me. So if
Yeah,
you-
so the 5 million was since 1920, we've used 5 million. And as you recall, there were a couple years, well, 1 year when we had the COVID dollars that we didn't use fund balance.
Right.
But every other year, we have balanced the budget using the fund balance. For next year, we had asked for a little under $1 million. So if you take the 5 million plus the 1 million that we're asking for, that's the 6 million.
Thank you.
Because we did make almost $4 million worth of expense reductions as we built the budget.
Thank you.
I just have a question. If there were questions by other board directors, could you share? I didn't receive any responses that had those questions answered, so I don't know if board directors had any other questions. I didn't see any responses.
I haven't had any email questions. I've come in and had a few face-to-face to get a greater understanding and really understand the difference between what the renew, do nothing, renew 30-month, 45 a month. And it was more to truly understand, the balance of listening to what we think the threshold may be and understanding what we're going to get, based on all the scenarios. So nothing via email, but just kind of having some softer conversations around, and it's all things that we've been presented. So
Well, I appreciate that. I was referring to Chair Francis' comment that there's been questions via email. Like I said, I didn't see any responses, so.
I just sent information into Director Frederickson about the inflation numbers that we use in our business and how they're actually higher than what the actual inflation number is being listed, which is between 6 and 7%. And then the fact that when I looked it up, it was 7.106% at that time. And so I didn't know if that had any impact because the industry that I work in is different. And all she did was respond with exactly what was in here and how they calculated it. So it was mostly personal to me, trying to understand my own personal business. And 20% increase on inflation in technology, 8% increase on goods and services, and then using also the construction industry estimates of, I think it was 8%, but then I went back and looked up the numbers, and the actual inflation rate as presented by the Federal Reserve was Federal Reserve and Bureau of Labor Statistics was 7.106%.
Much higher than I've seen, but I'm not going to argue that here at the board table. It's pointless.
Director Frederickson, looking at the 5-year forecast scenarios, with that, we're also assuming, in terms of operating expenses, that remains relatively unchanged. Is that correct?
I'm assuming that we have the same expenses, but that if there is an inflation factor, so for instance, our transportation contract, it's signed for the next 2 years. The increase for next year is 6%. That's a given. The following year, it'll be 8%. So that's what I build into the budget. We have increases in our utilities cost. We've gotten a letter from Xcel Energy saying they're increasing their rates by 10%. So again, anything that we know, I've included that in the money or the budget going forward. Some things like supplies, I'm making an assumption that it's between 2.5–3%, just based on historical data. But some of the things it's based on just historical data. But anything that I know is included in the expenses moving forward.
Thank you. And that would also include salaries and fringe and benefits, at least?
Yes, obviously, we
based off of
haven't
what we know.
settled all of our contracts, but given what we've landed on in the last 2 years, 4 years, we've made some assumptions about salary increases.
Okay, thank you.
So I, for one, really appreciate the different scenarios and the more detailed that was put in here. I believe you've already presented some of these, but having them all in one place with the levy numbers, that helped me understand it quite a bit. And also seeing the fund balance decrease as we continue to pull out of it, just to basically tread water.
I have a question. Do we happen to, if we are adding an inflationary factor into this levy, and we say that we're adding 10.8 million per year, and there'll be inflation on that number, so that number is going to grow, actually. So when you present this to the voters, do you show how that grows over the next 10 years so that they have a clear understanding that it's not just 10.8 million per year?
We certainly can. So if you look on the Minnesota Department of Education website, in their section about referendum, they actually have the cap inflation factor estimates going through the 2031 school year. So they've already determined what those are going to be. This is the form that it looks like. In the question, we will say that we are asking for an inflationary factor. Again, it's not up to us what that looks like. It's the Department of Education decides that, but they're going anywhere from an inflation of 1.13 to 1.17. So we'll certainly let the community know that we're asking for an inflation factor, but it's based on, the Department of Education is basing their numbers on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, their CPI for the urban consumers. So again, as it changes, the Department of Education will probably change theirs too. But
Right.
they've been determined through 2031.
Yeah, and
So then the homeowner would, you know, if we're quoting $45 a month, that number could change. That's what I'm, you know.
Correct.
Depend on
And that would be
inflationary
part of
factor,
our-
where, you know,
Yeah.
some people could say it's 1.5, some people say it's 14. I mean, it's basically like, I think the most important thing is that our homeowners have not, there hasn't been an inflationary factor in our levy in the past. So I think educating them on the fact that there will be, is that this isn't just a $10.8 million spend, it's more than that per year.
Correct. I think
as it
that
grows.
that's going to be part of that campaign literature so that we are informing our community about that inflationary factor. I think linking back to the source document that would guide what that would look like for our local community for now. And obviously, you know, over the years that could ebb and flow based upon the economy, but based upon what we have through, at this time, 2031, we would want to make sure that's front and center with our entire community so they understand the whole question and ask and what the impact would ultimately mean over the life of the operating levy. Excuse me, the operating levy. Forgive my voice tonight.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Director Frederickson, when I looked at other school districts, the majority of them did put the inflationary factor into the language. So I assume the language that's put into the question on the ballot is going to be the same as what we've seen in other school districts?
Yep, there will be, we'll use the standard template.
Right.
And again, we'll have our advisory company help us write that question. But there are several templates that we can use from other districts. Most districts will put an inflation factor in it. We'll certainly include that as part of the question.
And then I just want to go back to the fact that, you know, I understand what the financial situation looks like. And I think, you know, what I've been hearing from the community is that, you know, there's a desire to see cuts being made in areas that, maybe even some of the areas that we listed here before. But going back to the Morris Letterman survey, where only 8% of our community supported the $45 per month, and I understand Director Burnick's comment about there was the 500 survey and a high number of them are empty nesters, but I think the reality of it is a high number of our community, they are empty nesters, and their grandmas and their grandpas, and they care about where their grandbabies, you know, the school district and the quality of the school district that their kids are going to be sending their grandkids to. So I think we just have to be real with what the numbers were coming out of that Morris Letterman survey, and I think I don't think we can disregard that. So.
And I'll just, if I may, just respond. I think I agree, and I think we need to look at both what the support looks like as well as what the expectation looks like. And our community needs to understand of that fine balance between the expectations of what can be delivered at various dollar points and being as genuine as we can with our community so there's a return on the investment. I don't think there's many in our community who are looking for making an investment without something guaranteed for their kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, whatever, themselves through community education, et cetera. So absolutely agree that that whole conversation and many data points need to be balanced out against one another.
Are there any other questions? All right, I assume that the same presentation will not change and that when we go to a vote on July, that this information will be represented.
Unless there are things that happen between now and then, we will make any updates or changes that seem appropriate, but this is, as of today, what it looks like.
And we'll formalize the question presentation package as well.
Thank you.
So
With the
that'll be
actual-
something that will come to you.
With the actual question that'll be on the ballot. Okay, great. Moving on to our next agenda item then, which will require a vote, is the final presentation, the 2024 strategic plan. So before we go into discussion on this, can I have a motion and a second?
So made.
By Director Bullion,
Second.
second by Director Crosby. Okay. So going into the
Thank
strategy.
you,
I'll
Chair Franz.
hand this over to you.
Okay, thank you, Board of Directors. Thank you again for the conversation last week, and also just want to reiterate our thanks and appreciation for our community throughout the engagement, as well as the core planning team in trying to solidify a plan that speaks to a lot of what we've heard from a variety of stakeholders along this journey of the strategic plan. Last week, we really centered a lot of conversation around the vision. That was the one area that was really still being worked through in the conversation. And so we had in the board book, we've uploaded the original that came out of the core planning team. We added one that was much more truncated, almost the antithesis of what we saw a week prior, aligning to some of what already exists in our district. And then the third that you see here tonight is kind of a culmination of the conversations that we've had throughout our community, the conversations here with the board, and landing on a vision that we would recommend the board to consider being a world-class district centered on learning that prepares students for college, career, and life. Understanding that the vision is that aspirational piece, and I think several of you weighed in on really what is that growth factor of who we desire to become, and I think it's safe to say that we would like to be a world-class, district for our community. And we know that to not be redundant in some of the priorities and using priority language in the vision, we centered on learning, that whole notion of centeredness of learning, to allow our students, and again, primarily our students who are in our traditional PK-12 track, but we also know we serve other aspects where we know a lot of folks associate that. And our students are going to likely take, college pathways, career pathways, and life could encompass, going into the military, going into the seminary, whatever life success means. And so that's what you have before you tonight. Around a vision that we would offer for your consideration, along with the mission and priorities and core beliefs that carried over from previous conversations. So with that, Chair Franz, I'll turn it to the board.
Okay, so we have 3 vision statements: a world-class district centered on learning that prepares students for college, career, and life. A new one, Ignite Laker Pride, and the original one, which is student-centered, results-driven. So I'm going to open it up to the board for discussion and realize that we'd like to come to a conclusion tonight and have a vote on this. And the only thing that I believe, unless somebody says something different, is the vision that is still outstanding for us to come to consensus on.
There was other parts that we didn't have consensus on as well, which I can speak to.
Okay, so
But we can start with the vision. Debbie.
Well, my problem is I like them both, and that's hard. I like both of, well, I mean, there are 3, I know, but we were looking at, they're amended to, I like Ignite Laker Pride because I think it's quick, it's succinct, but I feel like there could be more to it as well, which the third vision, the third iteration of the vision, I think does too. My only thought for consideration is when we talk about college, career, and life, the way it's written for me makes it seem like students would do all, I mean, clearly they'd live their life, but would do all of that, college and career, and I feel like, some students don't do the college part. They go straight into career like you were kind of
Could be an
alluding
or
to.
versus an and.
Kind of, yeah, something like that. Maybe I guess I like all 3 of those things, but I kind of wonder if there's an or somewhere in there. But I like those revisions.
I'll just share that my personal favorite, although I don't feel really strongly about this, is the original student-centered, results-driven. I like that it's short. I like that it's direct. I think our previous vision statement was just really, really long. and I like that one too. But I think the rest of this document encompasses what we're trying to really accomplish. So I'm most comfortable with the original student-centered, results-driven. I also appreciate that it came from the actual originators. I want to respect that.
Well, Amy went first, but I actually like the last one better too. Sorry.
The original?
The original.
From
The
last
student.
week?
Yeah.
The student center.
I like that it's short. I like that it's student-centered. Because that's our foundation. And results-driven is pretty important, so that's.
I would just agree with, I don't have a strong opinion on them. I'm sure people could say pros and cons on each of them. So I don't have a strong opinion there, other than I do, the original, the Student Center Results Driven was from the original team, and I feel it is important to respect that. So I guess if I were to cast a vote, it would be on the first one as well.
Director Velazquez?
I'm kind of torn between two of them. I'll first start by saying I don't really know what it means to ignite Laker Pride. That might take a variety of different shapes and forms. But then when you dig down into the mission and then the different priorities, it kind of goes the two different directions of, are we building a world-class district centered on student success for college career life? Just eliminate the and. Or student-centered and results-driven. That's the quandary I find myself in. One of those two. Student-centered, results-driven, short and sweet, easy to remember. World-class district centered on learning that prepares students for college career life is not too far off of the previous mission statement that we had. Yeah, that's where I am.
Decision? Do you want to put your weights on one or the other? Or combined, or what works?
Probably keying off of Director Olstad's comment, if we just eliminate the and, where we prepare students for college career life, that's good enough for me. Linguistically, I know it's incorrect.
Thank you. I think, my comment about the original one was that it really wasn't, it didn't come from the core team. It came from the admin. My understanding is that the core team did not develop the vision, and maybe I can get some clarification on how that was developed.
The vision, like all these other areas, were a culmination of what we heard throughout the engagement, and the core team was presented a vision statement to respond to, and they've kind of weighed in back and forth on that vision statement at the very end.
Oh, okay.
So it's a culmination of things. This wasn't written in a vacuum.
Oh, okay. No, I understand that. I just thought,
Yeah.
I thought I heard that it didn't come from the core team, so that there wasn't a lot of time to do the vision based on the speakers. Maybe I'm just referring to the speakers who spoke, that they wish they would have had more time to work on the vision
We
statement.
would have loved more time on many of those evenings because it was pretty rich. But yes, the vision is one that came at the very end. And so, for example, like the community supported was a comment that was made at the closing minutes of that evening. And I added it just to honor that comment as the last one and brought it forward for that total conversation. But the other aspects were something that they actually weighed in on and had conversations about.
Thank you for clarification. I was excited to see, based on our conversation at the board table, that there were two other more aspirational vision statements, because I felt the first one was more of like, what should a school district be doing? It should be student-centered and it should be results-driven, and your vision statement is aspirational. And so when I first saw Ignite Laker Pride, I kind of liked it, but then I also was like, what does that mean? And so
the first thing that came to my mind is, what if we were to say foster our Lakers love of learning? Because when you think about it as a district, we are, it's all about learning, from kindergarten until grandma knitting yarn. I mean, all our community education classes and stuff like that. So I had written down foster our Lakers love of learning. And then when I saw the second one pop up today, I would say it was my least favorite, because it does not focus on the whole district. It focuses on the student. And again, I thought our vision statement was supposed to be focused on the entire district as a total. And so of the three, I would say I'm a little torn, because I don't love kind of either one of them. And then also, when I went back and pulled some of the very top school districts in our state, and there was a lot of focus on academics in their vision statement. And I felt, I don't know, like I said, I'm torn on the two. So I'm not sure if I have I would say if I had to pick, I'd be least interested in the original one, because like I said, it's not aspirational, in my opinion. And would be more inclined to support one of the other two.
Have a preference? Do you want to put your chips on one of them, or or spread them out? How are you leaning?
Yeah, I mean, I'm leaning, to be honest with you. Like I said, Ignite Laker Pride, I mean, it's definitely something that I think everyone can show some unity behind, but yet it doesn't really focus to academics. I mean, and then the other one, the other one, is there a way to revise the second vision to be more focused on our whole district versus just preparing the student for college, career, and life? I mean, do you have any feedback on that, from the fact that other districts have vision statements that support their whole district, if that makes any sense? And that's what I liked about Ignite Laker Pride, because it does focus from kindergarten all the way to the community ed.
The other change I didn't note on here, not to switch gears entirely, but I think just to note, is the elimination of PLSAS and saying "we are." I really appreciate that change. I think that's, it reads better, it reads well, and it, so I appreciate that change. As far as, I guess what I like about student-centered, results-driven is that it does encompass, to me, the whole student, because you're talking about centering on the student and strong results. So to me, it can read aspirational. We could add a bunch more verbiage to make it really aspirational. I prefer the simplicity of it. That's why I like it. And I think some of the aspirational items are in the rest of the document. So I feel I'm comfortable with that.
I am not as fond of Ignite Laker Pride. I like the original vision, but again, it was punchy, which was the goal of some of the feedback that we did receive. But I do like the concept of a world-class district, because that is truly aspirational. That is a world-class district centered on learning. I'm not sure we need to say that what we're doing is preparing students. It is what we're doing. If we wanted to shorten that, I would be fine with the world-class district centered on learning, or combine the other two. I just don't want to, that's results-driven also. But my least favorite is Ignite Laker Pride. And I'm okay with the other two. But I do agree now that Director Olstad pointed out that it makes it sound like all three of them college, career, and life, like they're supposed to do all three. Somehow or another, that just doesn't read right now that you brought that up. Mm-hmm. But I get it. I get what it means. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone's going to walk away thinking, now I have to do college and career, or shoot, whatever. But I just like the idea of a world-class district centered on learning, because to me, that is aspirational, and it also means that there's going to be a lot of discussions about what is a world-class district, because that is going to change, and that is the whole concept, kind of a vision, is that it stands the test of time. But I will go with whatever the board chooses. I just would, if I have to put my chip somewhere, it'd be on the first and the third, and not on Ignite Laker Pride. For some reason, when I first read that, it reminded me of a banner at a homecoming pep rally. That's the first thing that came to my mind, and while that does ignite, what happens when the pep rally's over and you're ignited and now you go back to work, it just kind of didn't feel as aspirational. So that's just kind of where my first reaction was. Not to say that that's where it is now after I've had a chance to let it sink in. But, so I'm going to ask Dr. Thomas and administration, what do we do now?
So I would say that, there's a lot of conversation around student-centered, results-driven for a variety of different reasons. This is the vision that came from the conversation initially with the core planning team. I think the feedback that you all gave as a board around having some aspirational aspects is important as well. And so my wondering to the board is, and keeping some level of succinctness to it, stickiness to it. And I think Director Atkinson, I think several of us also looked across the country at like top performing districts and like, what do these statements say? We looked at companies. That was actually an activity or exercise of the core planning team as well. And you'll see a lot of statements around world-class or best district or, things of that nature. So I'm wondering if this notion of aspiration of being a world-class, and folks define that for how they experience the district, because you're not going to be able to articulate every single word to every single person about what it means, because I'll read it for what it means to me, no matter what you put on here, and vice versa. So would it be something the board would want to consider with bringing perhaps that aspirational statement down to the student-centered, results driven, if it were to be something such as a world-class district centered on students driven by results? So you have the aspirational language, and you have those two areas that the core team talked about in centered on student, and results are, we're looking for outcomes. So I just offer that to the board to see how that might sit, to, I think, blend a lot of conversation.
Say it one more time.
Can you say it? I'm going to type it this time.
Glad we're recording this, but I think it was a world-class district centered on students driven by results.
I like that.
What about academic results? Because I think we've received several emails that, what do results-driven mean? Like, what results are we looking for?
And
I just want to add that one of the biggest takeaways that I heard in all the how do you say it, the community conversations, sorry, I'm lack of words today, was that our district really wants to see a focus on academics, academic proficiency. I mean, it's something that our district has suffered with in the last, 4 years. In fact, I looked up, and I don't want to bring this up, but I do think it's important. I looked up on schooldigger.com, and in the 22-23 school year, we were ranked 42nd in the state as a district, and last year we're 80th. And so I think that has something to do with the fact of why are we hearing this from our community, of this push for, and that their district ranking is all on academic, it's all on proficiency scores. And so I just think if there's any way we can get more of a focus on academics, I mean, I think just adding that one word would accomplish what we heard from our community. I like where you're headed with it, to be honest with you. And I think when you look at a world-class district is focused on academic results.
I think that's a statement on the table for you all to discuss
My-
potentially.
Yeah, I'm just going to share, I think, world-class district centered on students driven by results. I think that encompasses what, I think that encompasses an aspirational vision. it is not to say academic results aren't important. Yes, they are. We call them out, academic excellence. Our mission is inspire and empower each student to reach their full potential. So places like School Digger and perhaps other measures aren't entirely, in my view, the best measures, because each student has different potential. And so taking, you know, a rural needy student who's in a really needy situation, any growth there is growth. So we need to acknowledge that growth. And so it could go, you know, that could be real at a really low or very high level. I mean, it can be across the board, but I also don't want to not focus on the entire experience for students, whether it's athletics, activities, you know, growth in group work, growth in academic excellence. I mean, you name it, growth in handling social situations. Like, those are all things that are now put on schools. So to me, I think driven by results is just simply growth, right? Not just limiting it to academic growth, because also many times when you see growth in other areas, that will lead to academic growth. It takes time. So I felt pretty strongly that we're okay without academic results being in the vision. We know that's important. It's laid out on the document. It's in the mission. It's called out in academic excellence. It's results that are all encompassing as a whole person, as a whole child.
I would add that we've also heard from community that financial results are also very important, which are also called out with respect to optimizing our resources, similar to how academic excellence is called out as one of our priorities. I think results-driven in its simplicity makes the most sense to me.
I agree.
I like what you just came up with, and I don't think we need to say academic in there. We already have that in one of our pillars, and I like it.
Is it possible in the academic pillar, because I know you said we have it in there, but they're really, the way I read it in the academic pillar, there is not a just massive focus on academic proficiency in that academic pillar. And I think we could make a small tweak to that where, you know, we say students receive challenging, rigorous, and relevant instruction for the unique learning needs and goals and develop essential skills to be successful. Well, it says we're providing all this curriculum. There's nothing in that statement that says we are going to make sure that our third graders can read by third grade level. And that's like, if you go back to some of the plans, they say all third graders will read at third grade level. I mean, wouldn't it be awesome if we could walk away as a district and say our kids are 100% proficient in math, reading, and writing, or math, reading, and science? I mean, that to me is a world-class district, right? And so I'm fine with keeping it vague under results-driven, but I'm wondering if there's more, if we could put more focus on academics in that pillar. And
I think what you're getting at is not like, I think that is for sure the goal. Those are in, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like those would then be the goals that are in like in management scope.
I will say that the scorecard metrics that we'll be developing around the framework here of the strategic plan, whatever they might be called, but the performance metrics, scorecard metrics, that's exactly Director Atkinson, where we're going to have those very explicit goals. We know the ideal state is 100%, okay? I mean, there's not a district in this country that does that at 100%, 100% of the time, but we know that's where we will put a lot of those accountability metrics based upon averages, as well as our expectations of performance growth that we can project out. So absolutely, that's where a lot of that granular detail will be. And that scorecard framework, that will now be our quarterly report outs now to the board and to our community. So they will look different than what we've shared in the past, because they'll now have a common template to how we track progress. another aspect to that, going back to this whole notion of our community wanting levels of, I don't want to say transparency, just wanting to better understand what's happening in our schools, whether I have kids in the school or not. It goes back to this core belief that we want to have reciprocal accountability. The school or the community expects outcomes and results from the district for their student. We expect partnership with the community to help giving us the resources and supports to make those things happen. So that reciprocal nature is something that we're also going to be pushing into our schools and departments. So for example, having our schools on their landing page, having that scorecard metric of this is what our priority focus will be for the 24-25 school year based upon these factors. Now everybody knows what we're really working on. We're doing a lot, but we're going to hone in our report out to our community on these 3 key measures, you know. So I think that's exactly where a lot of that detail will land. And that's for departments, that's for schools. And I don't think anybody questions, and I can't say this enough, which is why the priority order and the term excellence. Excellence came out repeatedly. And we started with academic achievement, and so we wanted to reflect that, what we heard as a theme. And I think excellence, we did split some hairs, but I think excellence felt that it went to a higher bar. And so that's what we wanted to make sure the community saw, that we heard that. That's incorporated into the red language there, or the red term there. But Director Atkinson, yes, to your point, those academic measures, those outcomes, those will be scripted out in those metrics. And just like we do with our financial dashboard, we'll be able to track and monitor that in a different way now. And that's our next lift with Studer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then there's one other thing. So we did not have, how do you say, 100% alignment on the word inclusive. And I mean, I think it's really interesting that when we look at our plan, we talk about positive learning environments. And as I had mentioned, the word inclusive has 6 different definitions in dictionary.com. And some of the definitions for it, I fully support. I mean, who wouldn't support? But some of them I don't support. And I just, when we look at how can that bring unity to our community, I think the only way that that can bring unity to our community is if our district has a full, crystal clear understanding of what does the word inclusive mean to this district. And I think if we can define it, I don't know if we wanted to define it by board member, but at the end of the day, it's what is the district doing and how do they define inclusive, and what can our district expect from that word?
May I respond?
please.
So,
Please.
thank you for bringing that forward, Director Atkinson. And if I may, during one of our one-on-one check-ins, we were having some conversation about language and how language matters. And I do agree that language does matter. Language is generative. It creates and coordinates action between people. And one of the things that I was sharing in that conversation was really the need to take terminology back. There's not going to be a word in this plan, as you just noted, 6 different ways to define it in one resource, right? So we can't control how somebody interprets certain things, but we can own the narrative around the language that we use as a school district. I think it's critically important, and perhaps, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud to this statement, I think it will be important to have, for a lack of a better term, a glossary, if you will, of what do some of these things mean to us. You all have heard me say the term equity, and you've heard me define equity from my vantage point and what I expect as a superintendent, which I know is probably vastly different than how others might have interpreted it or charged it, or fill in the blank. And I have yet to meet someone who has challenged the understanding of equity, meaning giving students and staff what they uniquely need to be successful. That's truly what equity is about, because we all come with our unique story that makes us who we are in our classrooms, as a teacher, as board directors, when we're making key decisions. That narrative informs our decision-making, and we have to understand and appreciate and respect that. We might not always agree on that, and that's completely fine, but at the end of the day, decisions have to be made. And, you know, as your superintendent, I am committed to ensuring that we take ownership of our language, to ensure that when we are using language that may elicit certain responses based out of situations and contexts outside of our control, let's name that, but then say, that might be how that is defined there, but in this space, this is what it means for us. And I think that's going to be important, not just for the strat plan, but just in general. And we've chopped that up as a senior team, actually, on a variety of accords with different interpretations of how we move forward together as a leadership team. But, you know, at the end of the day, inclusion has its genesis in special education. Like, that is the taproot of the term inclusion in traditional PK through 22 education. I can tell you right now, with my SEEK meetings and hearing from our families who are receiving support from special education, the number one piece that they have been clamoring about is their students not being included, not being aligned more to that mainstream. We've heard it time and time again, and I'll just say not just in this district. I think it would be short-sighted of us not to challenge taking ownership of that language as a governing body, as a leadership team, so that we aren't excluding. Because the antithesis of this, the opposite of this, is exclusion, if it's not inclusion. We're not doing that. That's not an option. So I appreciate the push. I think it's something that we are committed to as a leadership team, and that we went back and forth on this term based upon the conversations with the board. But to lose the opportunity to take ownership of that narrative and really exclude a large growing population in our community, in our K-12 community, PK-12 community, is going to be a miss for us. So I would opt that the board consider that language and that we reclaim that language for what it means to service all students. With that, I turn it back to you, Chair.
So I would like to respond, since that was
Yeah,
my question.
sorry.
So I appreciate that, and of the 7 different definitions, that's the one different definition that I would feel strongly about as well, as long as that's what it means, because we all know that there are other definitions of inclusive that are not supportive, and it's basically, and I hate to say this, but it's what's been happening in our district for the past 4 years. The equity and inclusion has been divisive, and it's not been inclusive. And so that's why, if this is a major shift and we're gonna see a change in our district where it is welcoming and inclusive to all students, and as a parent, I don't feel unwelcome walking into a classroom because there might be something in there that makes me feel uncomfortable, I think that's wonderful. I mean, I think that's great, so.
Yeah, and I just want to also level set a little bit too, because even when if this is the direction that we take, there's not going to be a classroom or an experience that a student or a staff member or a community member is going to have in our district that's foolproof. That's going to be not something that they want to talk about or they might feel uncomfortable with. So we're going to have those conversations. It's not a one definition and we reclaim it and it's good. We know that there's going to be some nuances that are going to come up where I might say, hey, can you help me understand whatever the context might be? And through that conversation with that staff member or with that principal or with the board member or myself, that context will bring some understanding, and that may lead to some changes, or that may lead to some affirmation that thank you for your perspective, but this is the direction that we're going to move forward with, and here's the context of how we're engaging in that work. And I'm sorry it might not land like that individual or thousands of individuals might like, but at least they understand. And I think that's the key element to this whole conversation too.
Right. And I think the concept of unifying us on what makes us one and makes us Lakers is really important.
Sure.
And which I love the unity aspect of that, though. So, thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I'm going to bring this back to anybody else who wants to make a comment. No other comments, then we're going to repeat the vision. I hope I wrote it down correctly. I may ask you to repeat it again. And then we'll have a vote. Okay? Good. All right, then, the vision is a world-class district, student-centered, results-driven. That is student-centered.
Centered on.
Did I get that? Okay.
You're in the ballpark.
Okay, okay, because I got to get this right before we vote. So world-class district centered on students,
Comma, driven by results.
driven by results.
Did I get that right, Dr. Thomas? Driven by results.
Okay. So I'm going to repeat this one more time. So we are going to vote on the strategic plan with its vision, mission, core priorities, our priorities and core beliefs, with the vision stating world-class districts centered on students driven by results. I'll let you guys figure out the punctuation, okay?
Can we do a roll call vote for this, please?
I don't have a problem with that.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Atkinson.
I think,
What was this? I'm sorry.
Chair France, I think that, was it a world-class
A
district?
world-class
A
district.
world-class. Okay,
A world-class district centered on students, driven by results.
okay, I'll repeat this one more time for a vote. I hope I get this right. A world-class district centered on students, driven by results.
I will make a motion to approve that as it stands along with.
Oh, that's right, because we motioned on the other one. Okay.
The 6/17/24, number 2 draft, just this being the vision as it stands in our board packet.
Okay. So a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, second by Director Olstad. Do we have to repeat the mission again, the vision again? Okay, good. Good. So a roll call vote, Director Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me.
I just wanna
There's no more
comment.
comments after a vote is called.
That is not true. I can
That
comment.
is true, that is Robert's
true.
rules. Point of order, Director Atkinson, we're calling for a vote. If you want to
Nay.
abstain, again, nay. Director Velazquez? Director Bullion?
Aye.
Director Burnett? Director Crosby?
Aye.
Director Olstad?
Aye.
And aye, that passes 6-1.
And I will be revisiting the point of order with you because they're not correct. A board member has the right to make comments. So refuting my freedom of speech will be addressed. Thank you.
We can discuss Robert's rules later, but the vote was called for. Okay, moving on to the next topic, and that is certification of the District 719 Census Resolution. So we have a resolution in our board packet that will require a roll call vote. I need a motion and a second, and then I'm going to hand it over to Director Frederickson. Can I have a motion on this?
So made.
So made by Director Bullion.
Second?
By Director Velazquez? Okay. And I'm going to hand this over to Director pardon me,
I can take it.
Executive Director Dahl, sorry. And you were on here, and I was handing it over to her, so I apologize for that.
Okay. Thank you, Chair France, board members. So we are asking for a certification of our District 719 census. The last time that we did a certification was in 2022. You can see from the resolution that was shared with you, our census figures increased by 1,201, which is based on an estimate from the Minnesota State Demographic Center. And this is something that is updated every June 1st. Typically, unless there is a federal update done, this only has to be done when we want to, really. And so we did not do an update last year, but we are asking for an update to our census numbers for this year. And I'll take any questions.
Okay, I'm opening up the board to any questions on this.
I have a question. Do they break it out by age or,
They do not.
no?
No, they
'Cause I
just
know we
give
keep
you
hearing
a-
about these declining birth rates, so I was actually pretty excited to see that Because even if these are not babies moving into, kids having babies in our district, these are still taxpayers, right? So we're
Correct.
getting additional revenue from approximately 600 households or whatever.
Yes,
Coming into our
yep.
district, so that's encouraging. Thank you.
Yeah, and they don't break it down. They just give you a straight number, and it's on the website as well, so you can look there. You can pull the spreadsheet, but even on the spreadsheet, they don't break it down.
Thank you.
Director Dahl, the Scott County, through every year, they do update it, and they do break it down. The Compass report breaks it down in the state. So we did have a declining birth rate that's been going on, and 2023, we saw a slight uptick, I believe. But the 2022 numbers, the question that I have is, again, I know we're certifying this. Why exactly did we choose to certify this year? I know that 2020 census was a little messed up when we couldn't get final numbers for a while, but
Yeah, so typically, we only certify if we see an increase. If you have a decrease in your overall district population, you wouldn't go out and certify. So last year, and again, this information is all on the website as well, from the 2022 to the 2020, from 2021 to 2022, we saw a slight decrease of around 90. And now this, from the last time we did it in 2022 to the 2023, we have an increase. So anytime there's an increase, we ask to recertify.
okay. And again, the numbers don't say, because the Scott County says we're aging at a faster rate. Who's moving in are older.
Yeah, and this isn't based off of the Scott County information.
It's
This
only
is
based
right
out of
from the,
MD.
yep, this is right
Okay.
from the State Demographic Center's website, which
Great.
is updated every June 1st.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions? Okay. This is a roll call vote, so we'll start with Director Olstad.
Aye.
Director Crosby.
Aye.
Director Burnick.
Aye.
Director Bullion.
Aye.
Director Velasquez.
Aye.
Director Atkinson.
Aye.
And that's aye for me, so that passes 7-0. Okay, moving on to the next item, we have the superintendent evaluation summary. One of the primary roles and duties of each board member is to independently evaluate the superintendent. The superintendent is the only employee of each board member here and of the board. So on June 10th, 2024, the school board met in a closed session to discuss the annual evaluation results of Superintendent Dr. Michael Thomas. And per state statute, we are providing the summarized results of the evaluation tonight. Using the superintendent performance expectations as approved by the school board in September 2023, the school board determined that Dr. Thomas met or exceeded all of the standards outlined in the superintendent performance expectations by the 2023-2024 school year, with an average rating across all criteria of 3.4 out of 4.0. The PLSAS School Board has concluded in its evaluation of Dr. Thomas for the 2023-2024 school session that the board continues to have a high degree of confidence in Dr. Thomas and his role as the superintendent of District 719. In addition, the school board directors in their comments and ratings indicated the following that Dr. Thomas continues to exhibit. One was a high degree of ethics and integrity. Number 2 was strong leadership. Number 3 was the continual improvement of data transparency. Number 4 was the practiced financial stewardship and financial transparency. Number 5, that he continues to cultivate community relationships and community engagement. And number 6, that he continues to be a strong advocate for the district. Our district is not without its challenges and opportunities. The school board determined areas of growth and continued improvement reside in the following. We'd like to see a continuous improvement and measurable outcomes of academic achievement. And after a year of stressful contract negotiations, we do ask that he work this year with his administration to restore and improve upon staff morale. And number 3, that Dr. Thomas continues to find creative ways to engage the entire community as we tackle the challenges of the coming year. In addition to the specific achievements of the 2023-2024 school year, the board also discussed and agreed upon an overall summary of Dr. Thomas's review and comments. So I'm going to hand it over to Director Olstad, and she has accepted and did a very good job at the task to summarize the comments and input from the June 10th closed session from the entire board. So Director Olstad, if you would please read your statement to Dr. Thomas on behalf of the board.
Sure, happy to. Dr. Thomas, many of the overwhelmingly positive traits and attributes that you brought to this position 2 years ago still hold true today. Your strong ethics and integrity make up the base on which everything else is built. You rise to any occasion with optimism and a fierce advocacy for your most beloved constituents, our students. Dr. Thomas, you continue to boost trust in a community that needs to rebuild it. That began from day one, from the relationships you continue to build and strengthen with students and staff, families, community leaders, municipal groups, police, and legislators. All this in a year fraught with legislative challenges, budget constraints, levy considerations, SRO issues, and curriculum changes. You surround yourself with a smart and stellar team to strengthen the work of the district. As the old adage goes, good people want to work with good people. You have a coaching/servant leadership style that is uncompromisingly speckled with high expectations. You're not afraid to challenge or have hard conversations with employee teams or people in the community. It's a testament to you that you have actually been asked to be a mentor for other superintendents. Since day one and throughout your second year, you have enabled true transparency and improved community engagement. You have built and sustained productive relationships with stakeholders in our community and the entire state of Minnesota. Within our district, you have engaged the community in several ways, such as through financial town halls with help from your team, community engagement, and as part of our district's strategic planning process. You continue to make data accessible and available. You are visible in our community. It shows you care, whether it's having a cup of coffee with a family member or explaining detail in a financial report. Your talent as a communicator or your commitment to transparency has made a positive and measurable impact in our district. Thank you for making transparency and community relationships and communication two priorities in our district. The second year of your tenure at PLSAS hasn't come without its share of challenges and areas of opportunity. Academic outcomes still are not where we want them to be. We know we can do better. Our students rely on all of us, with you at the helm, to set them up for success. While all achievement isn't measured by test scores alone, they still remain one of the ways in which our district is measured. With curriculum changes adopted, with more to come, we encourage you to continue to work with staff and teachers to increase those numbers and better define learning objectives. We understand this doesn't happen overnight. Your challenge remains to ensure PLSAS remains a destination district for Southwest Metro families. Our teachers look to you to set the tone, and we are asking you to focus on improving staff morale. Now that we have the latest contract settlement behind us, we look to your leadership to ensure our staff know they are valued, respected, and make us all proud to be Lakers. Where you spend your time reflects your values and priorities. The schedule of a superintendent is no doubt filled, and the relationships you have built in your short tenure are already having a positive impact. Yet we are looking for you to prioritize your time to be in the schools and in the classrooms. We encourage you to visit more of them, talk to more staff and students, and be a fixture in the hallways. And lastly, in addition to being more present in our schools and classrooms, we ask that you, under your leadership, that you help to find more creative ways to engage our community and families. We have a large community, and to be successful, we need to find ways to partner, engage, and connect with a greater percentage of our community. We appreciate your attention to this crucial step in building a positive Laker community where all people feel welcome, listened to, and engaged. Dr. Thomas, we appreciate your leadership, your professionalism and candor in your role. You have a heart for kids, and it shows. We have tremendous faith in your work here in PLSAS and are proud to call you our superintendent and Laker leader. As you embark on your third year, please know that we want to support and encourage you on your professional journey any way we can. So let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Board, for those comments, and thank you for the opportunity to serve as the superintendent. The notion of good people want to be with good people, and I can say the same here as a superintendent in working with each of you. Although very unique styles that you all possess, but as a governing body, This is a board that I'm proud to be a part of. This is a board that I am, proud and honored to serve with in this community. So I want to thank each of you for your tireless work and the support that you've given to me as I return back to my home. And in terms of our work in the district, I think there's a lot that we have to be proud about. There's a lot that, I'm proud about in terms of the folks that I get to work with, many of whom are sitting in this room tonight almost on a daily basis, and those are the folks that I work most closely with, and that's the senior leadership team. So I just want to publicly thank each and every one of you for your countless hours and dedication to our students, our families, and the broader community. I wouldn't be the leader I am without a strong team. And so I just want to publicly thank all of you for your work in your dedication. And I also am blessed to be able to work with amazing staff, whether it's staff here in the central office or folks throughout our schools, from administration all the way to our custodians and food service staff and every other role in between. My greatest pleasure comes from when I'm in our schools at the game or at the place where the game is played. And I receive that feedback from all of you in terms of be on that field more. I long for those days. I will be the first to say that this past year had its share of challenges, and tensions were thick. And I know that a lot of my time was focused on, I'll say maybe a lot of the business aspects of the work of education versus where a lot of the magic was happening on a day-to-day basis, because there were a lot of key things that needed to be addressed and solved. And I do want to share with our staff that you will see my commitment, recommitment coming back into our schools where I love to spend most of my time, and really partnering with all of our staff in our schools and rebuilding that relationship and trust across all employee groups. I think that's absolutely critical. I am the community superintendent, and that includes all of our staff, that includes our families and a variety of other folks who are in our community. And so yes, I have to spread myself fairly thin at times, but I am committed to that challenge, and knowing that my heart will always be centered on being my personal best to everyone I encounter. And so when I take a look at our opportunities moving forward into next year and reflecting on this past year, I'm very excited with a new strategic plan to build out a very different performance framework that a lot of us will have to engage in, and expectations that we have for our students. Those also apply to myself and to every other staff member in this organization to really step up our game so that our students are getting the outcomes that they strongly desire and what our community strongly desires to see from our school district as well. So you all heard last week our presentation on QComp and the power of evaluation. I don't take the evaluations lightly that come from each of you, whether it's the culminating statement that you read tonight or the one-on-one conversations that we have as individual board members, and just your own personal feedback to me along this journey. Again, that's something I look forward to, that we all lean into this as we move forward for a new vision and a new future to becoming that world-class district that is going to be centered on our students and always going to be focused on our results, academic results, financial results, personal, social, emotional results, you name it. We want to be that world-class place for folks to call home. And so thank you all for your leadership, and thank you for your support in my journey as your superintendent.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else to say?
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we are closing our business meeting and adjourning to and transitioning to a study session. So I need a motion and a second to adjourn.
So made.
By Director Bullion.
Second.
By Director Crosby. Motion to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that passes 7-0. This meeting is now adjourned. We'll take a 5-minute recess and go into a study session. So technically at 7:20. This will be 21, so let me just say that, 7:21. And we are opening up our study session for June 17th. And for the purpose and agenda, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Thomas.
Excuse me, I'm going to turn this directly over to Dr. Edwards this evening, if he can. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Franz, directors of the board. We are here tonight with a great opportunity in front of us. This has been a conversation that we've had around the board table in the study sessions, and a request to bring forward behavior data here. And this is the first time that I can recall us bringing forward behavior data in this form and in this context with this team that's here to present information tonight, as well as provide different perspectives from across our levels. And we're extremely excited again to be here, because we feel, while the numbers tell one story, the experiences tell other stories. And we felt it was important to bring a team here to share perspective from each level, elementary, middle, and high school, about what we do in our schools to support our students in a very important aspect of their development, which is around behavior. We certainly, as was talked about in the board meeting earlier this evening, the business meeting, around our academic excellence, which is now adopted in our newly adopted strategic plan. We also have other components that are part of that strategic plan that are represented in our behavior data, specifically our learning environment, that third priority, going from left to right on the new strategic plan, as well as our beliefs around the environment that we want to create and the responsibilities that we want to instill in our students as they come through our system around respect and accountability, all components of supporting them as students around behavior. So we're here to share some brief data with you, and for that I'll turn it over to Director Zumbush to share that, and then we'll pull forward members of our team that are here tonight.
Thank you, Director Franz, members of the board. I'm going to talk a little bit about behavior data, and just I wanted to orient you a little bit to the complexities of the nature of behavior data. One of the things that is important to know when we're looking at behavior data is it's a really complex combination of both a student behavior and an adult response, as well as then the recording part of it. So in all the different systems that I've done work, it's always really hard to disentangle what part of that has to do with the actual student behavior versus how much of that has to do with the adult response to that behavior. So you can't really look at behavior data and say it's going up or going down, so our behaviors are getting better or they're getting worse. It's too complex to look at that longitudinal piece over time. One of the things we can look at is some of the trends that we see in terms of location, which students are getting referred, are they proportionate, all those things that we can look at over time that as we move forward digging into behavior data, we can do that in a more detailed, in-depth way. It's also important to note that every level, and I think you'll hear this with the speakers tonight, every level has a very different system of behavior, and a behavior that may be classified a certain way and one level may not be classified that way in another level. So just know that when we're talking about elementary, middle, and high school, that there's different codes that we use for behaviors and different ways of classifying behaviors, because, you know, as students get older and more developmentally mature, then we would expect different things from them. So just a brief orientation of some of the complexities of the behavior data that we have. So you can report incidents and you can report responses. The incident is how the behavior is being classified, and the response is what the adult did in response to that behavior. For tonight, I'm just presenting the incident data, so that's actually what occurred and was reported in the system. We have two major ways of classifying behavior, majors and minors. Majors are things that kind of go up to a higher level of severity. Minors are something that's more like a conversation or a coaching conversation that adults have with students. For the purposes of display and just showing you the data, I chose to just pick minor or majors because minors are a little bit more disparate in how they're recorded in our systems. And so we just have a little bit more of the consistency with the majors because, you know, we have reporting requirements for majors. For minors, that's really kind of a student and teacher a case-by-case basis and can look really different across the different levels. So what I did here for this is our K-5 data for this year. What I did is I listed all of the incident codes that are possible at the K-5 level, and I ordered them from the most common one that occurred this year to the least common. So you can see physical aggression was the top major code used in the K-5 level, down to technology violation being the least used. I pulled out the number of students with majors. So here you can see there's 357 students across our K-5 system that had one or more major this year. That totaled 1,195 incidents. So many students have more than one. So you can look at it by how many students had a major and then how many total majors there were. You can see here that of students that had a major, the average was 3.3, and then the maximum incidence per student was 46. So there's an individual student with 46 majors this year, and then it would go all the way, it would range from 1 to 46. Again, there's other ways to display this data, and we'll talk, and the speakers will again talk about what this looks like, but this is up from last year, and we think that it's attributed to the fact that we have people to actually respond and record and address the behaviors. So again, that's the complexity of behaviors going up doesn't necessarily mean that behaviors are getting worse. We did a lot at the K-5 level this year to really norm across our buildings. There was some, practices that popped up over time across the buildings, and we spent a lot of time with the full-time deans and the principals really getting that normed across the 7 elementary schools so that we can have much more consistency, and we feel much better about our data quality this year than in previous years, and that's largely due to the dean role. In the middle school, grades 6 through 8, again, on that left-hand side, these are the incident codes ordered from the most common to the least common. And there was 318 students with majors, a total of 853 majors in the middle schools, an average incident per student of 2.7, and then the maximum incidence per student was 31. And then the same thing at high school. Again, we have the most commonly used incident code to the least common. And our average per student was 1.6, and then maximum incidence per student was 12. So it's just it's a starting point on looking at our behavior data, and I'm happy to pull things in other ways over time. But now I will turn it over to our speakers to talk about their experiences in the schools.
And before we pull up our speakers, and we're going to start with elementary, as a reminder, as a board, we did take action for this upcoming, or for this current school year that we just finished up, to have full-time deans, one at each of our elementaries and one at each of our middle schools, which was an increase in resources. And as Dr. Zumbush pointed out, obviously increased in resources caused us to be more on top of a number of behaviors and be able to support our students in their development, as I mentioned earlier. And we definitely do believe that we have created some strong systems now, as Dr. Zumbush alluded to, that have allowed us to track this data more accurately across our system and be able to problem solve both at the system level, at the building level, as well as to the individual student level. And that's what our guests are going to, additional presenters here. So I'm going to bring forward representatives from Five Hawks, our principal and our dean. I'll let them introduce themselves, but real quickly, they stepped forward because they had one of the longest standing relationships in that we started with a full-time dean the second half of the school year, two school years prior, at Five Hawks and at each of our sites that had center-based programming for our special education students due to the nature of the needs of support. So this team has been together for a year and a half now, and they're going to come speak about their work.
Evening, Director Franz, school board members. We're happy to be here today. I'm Katie Sherman. I'm the principal at Five Hawks.
And again, thank you, Director Franz, members of the board. I am Mandy Hainline, Dean of Students at Five Hawks.
And when we are invited to speak about behavior, we want to say that we have done some really significant work this year as a team of 7 buildings with 7 principals and 7 deans. And so getting on board, we've made some gains this year, and we look forward to additional work this year to standardize our practices. When we think about the whole child, we think about who they are academically, and we also think about who they are behaviorally. And as the people that welcome our earliest learners, we get a mixed bag of kids. We get a mixed bag of kids with math skills, and if they don't know math, then we support in different ways for math. Same with reading. We have different reading supports, and it's the same with behavior. The addition of deans in the past year has done a lot for our kids, and it's done a lot for our ability to track data, share that data with our teams, and then respond accordingly to that data. Another thing that has been really helpful to us at the elementary level is prior to this year, we're now using something called EduClimber, which is basically a data warehouse that allows us to extrapolate data and use that data to inform our practices. And we didn't really have that before this year. Years ago, when we adopted PBIS, I would say it was 10 or so years ago, any school that adopted PBIS got a free subscription to a great data tracking system called Swiss, but it was a costly website or app, I don't even know what it was, and so we stopped using it and we went to Infinite Campus. Infinite Campus did not give us data that was usable, so EduClimber is giving us data that is usable, and our deans have done remarkable work with that. So those are 2 big kind of game changers for us, which is why we're having so much discussion at the elementary level as we discuss our practices and try to standardize, if you will, what we're doing when there is a behavior incident, and then how we respond and how we track the data. What else would you add, Mandy?
Yeah, when I think one of my roles is looking at behavior and looking at data, and what I love about data, and yes, love about data, is I was trying to summarize it and I came up with 3 Ps. So I think 1, it really allows us to partner, and number 1, that's with our families, that's with our parents, that's with the guardians of kids. Not only families, but working with the bus company, working with the drivers, working with county like St. David's and social workers. So really partnering. I think the second P is really being proactive, and I think that is huge when you're looking at data and when we're looking at behavior. So that has been a very big piece of what deans have been able to do, and when we look at our data, and I think it's usable data, and I think that's really important to keep in mind, we can bring that data back to our leadership teams and really look at the trends. What is it saying? What do we need to do for certain students when next year comes around, for groups? So I think that proactive piece, and then I just think it creates problem-solving teams, not only as the educators and the kind of for the principals, the deans, the teachers, but helping our students to be problem solvers. And as I reflected, I really thought about that proactive and problem-solving piece is so important because at the elementary level, that's what I will speak to, is that our students are learning and growing, and we have to educate and teach and provide the strategies and provide the responses so that when they do go to junior high or middle school, and when they go to the high school, they have those skills to be successful, and that is what this data and what I think the 3 Ps allows us to do.
I would just say one more thing is we talk a lot about an MTSS system, which we know the tiers of it support our kids at different levels. And most kids come in and maybe have siblings at home or they've practiced a lot of problem solving when there are things that crop up, but not all kids have, or just need additional supports in order to get through the day in a manner that's respectful both to themselves, to their classmates, and to their teacher. And so we use the MTSS model for behavior just like we use the MTSS model for academic concerns or attendance concerns. So we use that tiered approach for all of the whole child, really, including family problems around attendance. So everything kind of falls into that. And so when you look at this data that we shared with you today, I know that we've worked extensively with some of our kindergartners who, when they get upset, might strike out at a child instead of using their words. And where we can intervene is really teach them, when you get frustrated, this is what your body feels like. And so we're teaching them to identify those triggers and then give them replacement behaviors so that they know how to handle themselves the next time a frustration might occur. I don't know if there's more you wanted us to say.
I think we'll do each level, and then we'll have any questions. One point of emphasis that they mentioned, and I just want to emphasize it just a little bit more with regard to a focus that we did across our system, but certainly at the elementary level, was the mention of working with the bus company and the bus drivers. We put a lot of energy and focus into that this year. That was based upon some data that we received in our Studer survey from a year ago, that was a place that our students were reporting not feeling as safe and not feeling as supported. And so we did a lot of work, the deans did at each of the elementary level, with our bus company, with our bus drivers, and we look forward to continuing that relationship and strengthening that partnership, because to one of Mandy's P's, partnership, that is another key aspect of our students' day, is that to and from school. So without further ado, I'm going to bring forward one of our deans from the middle school.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Zach Johnson. I'm the dean at Twin Oaks Middle School. So this is my first year here in the district, but I work with my counterpart, Scott Peterson, who's at Hidden Oaks across the street, and together we're partnering on data. So I will, echo back to a lot of things my elementary colleagues said. We do a lot of partnering together, not just as deans, but with our teachers to be working together, looking at our data so that we are aligned in our practice and what we're doing, how we're responding to the behaviors that we're having at our school. So the middle school level, we really lean on our PBIS, our positive behavior interventions and support model, and how we use that to help teach those behaviors that we want to see kids have at school, right? And then respond to those behaviors as well. So really PBIS is really that tier 1 intervention. We do a lot of work at the beginning of the year to teach kind of what does it mean to be a middle school student? What does it mean to be a Laker in our building? And that goes with lessons that teachers are doing the very first week of school. I'm in meeting with every grade level to kind of talk through, hey, these are the big things we need to look at. And then as the year goes on, Mr. Peterson and I meet with a teacher team of leaders to analyze our behavior data. And then quarterly, we're checking back in with grade levels to say, hey, you're doing a great job with this, but you're still running down to the lunchroom. So we need to work on that. We need to focus in on those behaviors. And those are kind of those big interventions and supports. And then now, having a dean in each building, I'm able to interact with more kids, where Scott was doing that job between 2 buildings, really being able to interact and work with those kids one-on-one to give them those supports when that first level of intervention doesn't work, right? And they're still not following those expectations. How do we help them process through what happened. And so that might look like a simple conversation. We have a behavior processing sheet that we've done to help them think about what were the situations that led up to my behavior? What were other kids doing? How was I feeling? What was happening in the classroom? What did I do? And then think about what are the implications of what happened and how do we make it right? So that might look like restorative conversations. That might look like some restitution, right? That looks like a bunch of different things that we can do to have kids try to make that right, to repair those relationships, and then hold them accountable for what's happening in the classroom as well. So I would just say, kind of to wrap it all up, for us, behavior is really about teaching the kid, right? Teaching the kid that's in front of us and helping give them the skills and develop the habits and the mindset so that when they go off to high school, when they go off into the community, they have those things, right, so they can be a successful adult. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And real quick, before we bring high school forward, just wanted to also set a context that I failed to mention at the outset, was as we went into this current school year that we just completed, you might recall that we had some legislative action that happened in May of 2023 that we needed to respond to and address, which was limits on alternatives to suspension. And so that was a real focus also this year that we haven't yet talked about, but I do happen to think that Ms. Eggerman might be speaking to that here as she speaks about the data and as they analyzed it at the high school. That was certainly a focus across our system, so I just wanted to set that additional context.
My name is Kate Eggerman. I'm one of the assistant principals at the high school. I have to echo everything that my colleagues just spoke to about how, and it's really reassuring to hear that there's a lot of similarities between each level in our district. When Dr. Edwards asked me to speak this evening, I kind of came up with 3 big bubbles. The first big bubble in terms of behavior support at the high school is our multi-tiered systems of support, our MTSS models. We have so many fantastic adult resources at the high school. We have counselors, we have social workers, we have a chemical health specialist, we have fantastic deans. And all of those adults are meeting so often to talk about how we can best support students. And I really think that's the biggest piece at the high school that's really allowing us to be proactive in our approach to behavior. Oftentimes, we're getting together, whether that's in our bar weekly meetings, our student assistant teams meetings, our AP Dean check-in meetings that all happen weekly to discuss students, what their concerns are, how we can support them. Our goal at the high school is every student has a trusted adult, whether that's a teacher, a counselor, another support staff, so that they have someone they can turn to. Another big part is our partnerships with families. I have been blown away by support from our families this year, and it's oftentimes, you kind of have this anticipation of calling a parent about something their student might have done, but I'm often really surprised with how supportive our families are, and I truly believe that comes from consistency between our elementary to our middle school. Families know what to expect. And again, it sounds like we're in alignment with how we're responding to behaviors, which I feel helps our families understand why we have to respond to behaviors. And lastly, leveraging our community supports. Oftentimes behaviors aren't happening because there aren't bigger things going on. We've been lucky to partner very closely with Scott County, our SRO, Treehouse, which is, focusing on attendance and truancy. So we have a lot of community support as well. Not as many bus situations at the high school, it sounds like, but a couple of those too. Parking.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we're going to open it up for discussion and questions that you might have around the information that we presented this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This was wonderful and very insightful and educational. All things for Board of Education was very educational. So I'm going to open it up to the board for any questions, and you can start from wherever.
I have a question. And it is for all levels, unfortunately, so you can all get your steps in. I am really curious. Now, we do have an idea of this, right? In terms of incident codes and majors, but what, like, when you reflect on this year, maybe versus other years, like, what trends are you seeing, and how are you, when you see those trends, where are you having success in dealing with behaviors, and where are you having maybe increased challenges or not as much success? And not to say that we have more resources to give, but just to kind of have that conversation a little bit.
I'll start. And specifically at the high school, one thing, and this is my second year in the district, so if I'm comparing it to my first year, I believe we've seen a significant reduction in like the physical altercation fighting, and I believe that's because we have more vigilance in the hallways. We have, we noticed in looking at our data, some of that unstructured time, Laker time, passing time, and lunch, where some of those times where students had a lot of free time is when they got really creative in how to use their time. So we were mindful in putting the right people in the right places, and just kind of stopping things as they start. I believe that in doing so, we had a better pulse on our building during those times. Something that I think continues to be really gray is that defiance or insubordination piece, because it's not what I might think is a level of defiance, someone else might not, and vice versa. So I think those are always going to be gray because those elicit a deeper and bigger conversation on how we respond as a school. And those are the hardest conversations, because those aren't always met with me and someone else seeing eye to eye because of lived experiences, of how we interpret things. So I think that's a piece that's always going to be tricky.
Thank you.
And I would have to agree at the middle level with both of those things. I think that, like, again, it's my first year in the district, so I'm going to speak kind of what I've heard from colleagues from the past. I think we've had a lot of success with the physical altercations piece as well. We really didn't have that many this year, right? It's very few and far between, and physical altercation is hard because sometimes you think, oh my gosh, it's blood and it's all, no. Sometimes it's literally just, I'm a 7th grade boy, right? And I want to look fun and cool in front of my friends, and I make a dumb decision, right? And it goes too far, right?
Doesn't happen.
Never, right? So those are the things that, like, again, those are gonna happen, especially in a building our size or in a middle school campus our size. We're gonna have those things happen. But I think, again, having the adults in the right places, right? Working with the teachers, working with the staff to make sure that we are diving and we're addressing those things right when they happen, that puts a stop to it. We had a similar situation with our 6th graders in our 6th grade pod in our building this year. And working with the teachers, when they were able to feel empowered to go in and intervene and say, hey, I don't know you, but that shoving around, we don't do that here, right? When we're able to address it right away, I think kids suddenly realize, oh, okay, here is what the line is, and this is what's okay in school, and this is what's not okay in school. And that hard thing too, like Kate said, is what's defiance, what's insubordination? Because we all have good days and we all have bad days, right? And even I as a person will show up, right? Not as my best self sometimes, and I might not respond the best way. And even when I was in the classroom as a teacher for 10 years, there were times that I didn't respond to students the best way either. And then the response I got back, I was like, oh, that crossed a line. So I think those are always going to be the hard thing that we continue to work on in our practice as well, because we have to remember that these behaviors come from somewhere, right? And so by working both with staff to recognize, oh, hey, what's going on in this kid's life, and working with kids to recognize, hey, when I have a bad day, what's the right way? You know, what's an appropriate way to respond, or where can I find that help or support that I need? That's really what our job is, right, is working with both sides of it and trying to help align. So I think that's always going to be a concern, but that's why it's so important to have us in the buildings, because we're working with kids, right? So, yeah.
I appreciate the question because it's focused on success, and we have seen success. I want to lead with, we believe that behavior, when there is a behavior incident, it is the result of a skill deficit and not willful disobedience. And so when we talk about our our successes, they come from teaching. And that is what our full-time deans at the elementary have given us, is another person who can proactively be teaching. Our social workers, so I'm kind of jealous of the high school when I heard about the levels of support. We do have a social worker at the elementary, and as of last year, we have a dean. But the social worker has a pretty full slate of students to whom they are beholden because of IEP minutes. And so doing a check-in, check-out, or adding additional supports with the social worker is pretty limited. Having a dean in each building, Mandy does so much proactively. She's doing check-in, check-out. Even for attendance, kids, just giving kids one more person to say, we're so glad you're here, and I'm checking to make sure that you're here. Also for behavior, she spends lots of time in the lunchroom, which is a more unstructured time of the day, and on the playground, which is another more unstructured time of day. So as we continue teaching and putting supports in place and interventions in place, the biggest success is that we have a level of support right now that is being proactively done and consistently done.
Other questions?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the descriptions and how you frame the conversation, more on the positive, more on the education, and identifying that it's not a willful disobedience. It might be more of just a lack of the specific supports and the building blocks to help our learners. I appreciate that. I have a question on the incident codes. There's some nuance within some of these different areas. Are there a set list of definitions for every single one of them?
So first of all, discrepancy by level. Some codes are used at secondary level, some at elementary level, based upon the type of behavior that we're monitoring or more commonly experiencing that we are addressing. So we have the ability, and we've been utilizing, as Dr. Zumbush talked about earlier, we had our codes that we were utilizing, and I think it was Katie that mentioned the use of EduClimber now to record. And so we continue to work on consistency with that across our system to make sure we're recording occurrences of behavior in a similar manner at each of our elementaries and obviously at our middle school campus and at our high school. So those codes are codes that are the most frequently used codes, as is noted here.
Okay, thank you.
Realizing that there's not some not defined definitions, if you will, for some of these, can you talk about what would be considered, because I find this fascinating. What would be considered, well, first of all, a technology violation, especially like in elementary, what would that be? I threw glue at the smart board. Like, I jest, but I'm not jesting. I mean, I don't, especially at the elementary level.
During media, for example, we had a student who went in and somehow got into other students' accounts and was deleting some of their projects. That, to me, that would be, yep, and on an iPad, thank you. So that would be a technology. If they maybe have an iPad out and they're on something they're not supposed to be, or, I mean, I would say they're, at least, I can only speak to Five Hawks, few, but that would be an example, more so iPad use. At elementary level, I'm not seeing a lot with cell phones or anything at Five Hawks. So again, I'm only speaking to Five Hawks, but it would be more iPad misuse.
I think a general thing that we could say when we go back to the elementary, it might look concerning that there's a high level of physical aggression, but we consider anything to be physically aggressive. So if kids are in line and one pushes another, and it is referred to us because maybe there's been multiple reminders to that child, we put it under physical aggression. So I do want to manage expectations that it's not a fight, it's not bloody noses, it's not punches, which sometimes they are, but kids that are moving fast, and there's great desire at the elementary level to be first in line. And so if you're running there and you push somebody, that falls under that category of physical aggression. And that's where I think the middle schools working together are starting to standardize their practices in the high school as well. This is where we are continuing the work at the elementary level because it's a little bit different at every building, and so we are continuing the conversations, including how should we be recording data for children that already have supports in place through an IEP? How about children who are in the MTSS process and are receiving support from a dean or a social worker? And so we're continuing those conversations this year and into next year.
Thank you for that. And I have two more definition kind of questions. On the high school slide in particular, academic integrity. What does that mean?
That's a great question. So if a student was plagiarizing a paper,
Okay.
cheating on a test or quiz,
Okay.
using someone else's work as their own, that would be academic integrity.
Okay. And then, thank you, that makes sense. The physical aggression, the, fight, altercation, things like that, do you know, is it mostly student to student? Are there student to teacher, kind of physical aspects? I know you were talking about, I want to be a big shot, so I'm just going to shove my friend, through the hall, versus I'm hurting a teacher or I'm hurting a staff member. Or and I don't know if there's a way to do that. I'm just curious if
Sure.
a lot of that is happening.
I can only speak to the high school. The past 2 years, I've never dealt, nor has my team dealt with a situation where there was a student to teacher physical altercation. Typically, it's one student with one student in these sort of physical altercations. But to Katie's point, we also see a lot of play fighting, like the shoving or the trying to do something really cool that turns into something way bigger than I think either student might have thought it was. So it's not always this malicious fight, but either something physical that went too far, but which we still code as a physical altercation at the high school.
Sure.
And I just wanted to, I spoke earlier about the additional support that we put in place a year and a half ago at each of our schools that had a center-based program in serving our special education students. We do have situations where the physical contact between student and adult happens in some of those situations where we're working with those students on regulation of behavior, specialized supports in place. So I don't want the impression to be that that never happens, but we certainly are monitoring that and putting in systems to support those students with behavior support plans, et cetera.
Sorry, one more question. I don't mean to take all the time. At what point, to your point, Dan, what point would something like this become, I mean, we get the notifications too about like the medical emergencies that happen in the schools and things like that. So is that a different, which I know not all medical emergencies are behavior related, I get that. But is there a step two, like if something is like a physical altercation or something like that, where there's a step two where like medical personnel were involved or called to the school, or there was like a, what is it called, shelter in place or something?
Yeah, I would say actually most of those,
I was going to say, speak to the multiple category, because sometimes
That's the word I
what
was
you're
looking
getting to.
for,
So
yeah.
she's looking for multiple category identification where what's the lead and then what might be supporting categories.
yeah, so first of all, I wanted to address the, most typically the situation, and I have each level represented, so please, if there's something different that you would share here. But most typically, the responses that you're referring to, the shelter in place and those types of things, medical situations, we would describe medical situations.
Medical.
And most of those situations that I'm familiar with where we've had to do those have been for that reason. We certainly have had situations where there are students that we are working to work through a particular behavioral situation that might cause us to do that. We are going to be working in our SRP process to roll out for next year, where we might call that a hold, we're in hold, we're holding our position at the moment and not having passing time, et cetera. But we do have some of those situations that are those behavioral situations, but I would say very rarely.
I would just add that there are times when a child is dysregulated and out in the hall, and if we call a hold or a shelter in place, it is twofold. It is for the safety and security of children, and it is also for the dignity of the child who's dysregulated. Do you add anything to that?
Very common.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Okay, good, go ahead.
I just want to say I really appreciate the reporting. Like, I think that Dr. Edwards, you said this is kind of the first time it's been reported like this and in such depth. So I appreciate all of you coming and sharing it. I think as a parent of a high school student, I would agree that I have heard from my student that the incidences have gone down tremendously. And so I love hearing it. I love the affirmation from the adults in the room.
Telling you the truth.
He's telling the truth, right. And so I think that one question is, there is a little bit of differences between the elementary, middle school, and high school, the coding and all the things. And so is the desire for going forward that this will be reported similar so that we see consistent reports like this going forward? Is that the desire?
Yeah, and actually that was a topic, as you were talking about earlier tonight in the business meeting around the strategic plan and what are the next steps to provide information. This would be an example that we would work to make a more common update to you throughout periodically throughout the year. In the sense of end of the year reporting, it's probably going to be the most complete picture because I think it would be safe to say that there are some documentation that is not complete until the year is complete, but we will be bringing updates to you on a periodic basis.
And one last comment, I just really appreciated the focus given based on the Studer results from last year. I appreciate that focused attention given by, feedback that you received from stakeholders and that there was positive change and success in that. So thank you for all your work in that.
I have a couple questions. For the elementary level, for the non-exclusionary discipline that was passed this year in the legislature, how does that impact the data that we're seeing? Are you reporting the non-exclusionary discipline?
The basis of non-exclusionary discipline is that they would be in our system and any behavior incidences would be tracked, but that and the legislation says we are not allowed to suspend K-3. What that tells us is we have to work really hard to make sure we're putting the correct programming in place. Director Bullion, to your point about there's some discrepancy with the numbers. I haven't tracked the data over multiple years. I know I've been in education for a long time, and behavior is always a part of the learning that kids do. I would anticipate, this is me, and maybe I shouldn't even go there, but we probably will always have higher incidences at the elementary because we are where we put supports in place, right? So we are the first recipients of kids, and as we're teaching and as we're building skills and as we're developing programs to reach them where they are, they're probably making some mistakes. Is that too bold to say? But I would anticipate that. And so I'm not sure what the question around non-exclusionary discipline is.
So let me clarify my question. So if a kid is running down the hall and throwing a chair, not my understanding of non-exclusionary discipline is there's really nothing you can do about it. Is it reported as a incident of, I'd have to go back to the elementary disruption or whatever it might be?
Yep, non-exclusionary discipline more directs our responses and not how we're tracking data. And I would just clarify
So
that
you're
we
recording,
don't
that's what
ever
I'm asking.
not do anything if a child is dysregulated to that level where safety is a concern. This is not part of non-exclusionary discipline. This is our data tracking for our purposes. Non-exclusionary is more based on our response.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then for the middle school, a question for the middle school. Regarding cell phones, so we had some small changes in cell phone policies this year. What have you seen as it relates to behavior?
As it relates to behavior, I would say that I haven't seen it, like, in general, I haven't really noticed it as much of a problem in the buildings. Now, do teachers have different incidents that happen in class? Absolutely. I would say, though, that for the vast majority of kids that would get a cell phone referral, it's one conversation and it's done. And it's never a problem again, right? Do you have some kids who it takes more? Absolutely. We had to do some different interventions that were more, targeted for specific students that were struggling to follow that. But it wasn't ever anything that I think was disrupting the whole learning environment. It was just individually for that student or the insubordination piece.
Well, I think my question is, have you seen an improvement in behavior with limiting the use of cell phones?
Great. And so I think the hard thing for me too, right, being my first year in the district, so I think it's hard for me to speak specifically to the improvement in the behavior from, the previous year to this school year. But anecdotally, what I've heard, right, is that they haven't seen them as much in the hallways. Now, I know we are looking at making some changes next year, right, that I think are going to be really positive changes as well, right? Because we're hearing, again, there are some kids who can't handle that, especially at our upper grades, mostly in our 8th grade, I would say. And so by going through and making some of those changes, I think we're going to improve that piece of it in terms of behavior. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I have a question for the high school. I can't exclude you. And having a high schooler, I will have to say, I would reiterate what Director Bullion said, is that I'm hearing a lot of positive things come out of the high school. So thank you for all your hard work. The question I have is, when you look at your chart for different categories, one of the categories is tobacco. Is that also referred to as vaping?
Yeah.
Those two are-
Well, if it's a tobacco vape. So, yeah, alcohol so tobacco would just be nicotine products, so a tobacco vape. Not many cigarettes or any other form of tobacco being used. And then other substances would fall under that, alcohol or drug.
Oh, so
category.
vaping falls under alcohol or drug.
Well, if it's a chemical vape versus a tobacco vape. And those are pretty easy to tell the difference between.
Okay, thank you. I guess I have a question, last question for all of you. Are there any policies, I mean, we as a board are to implement policies that help make your job easier, to put guardrails in place to help with behavior. Is there anything that you would recommend or like to see differently that would help your jobs in managing the behaviors within your district?
I've personally used the policies quite often in working with families, and I am very grateful for those policies to reference back to. Sometimes it can turn into someone thinking it's an administrator or a dean's, I can't think of the word. Yeah, well, yeah, like I have something against their child, or I'm making this decision solely based on this one situation. When I can turn to board policy and say, actually, this has been decided on, it makes the conversations more streamlined. So I've really appreciated the board policies that we have. Off the top of my head right now, I can't think of any that I would like to see different verbiage or different, other than I use them often because I'm that type of person to just kind of have them in my back pocket if I need it. So I appreciate them.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add, and this wasn't by design, but it is now, as you bring that forward, both Kate and Katie are two principal representatives on the policy committee. So they've been a part of revising and looking at the policies this past school year.
Okay, thank you.
I think I would almost echo the same thing for the policy piece, that, again, I use them probably in their toughest situations, honestly, right? It's the small behaviors that are, I would say, the easiest to kind of manage that on. It's those tougher situations where I really appreciate the policy to fall back on, because there is a line right? There is a line and we have to uphold that. And so that's one of those that's easy to pull out and say, hey, this is the policy and this is what we have to stand on. So I appreciate all the work that you do because policymaking isn't easy, right? So thank you for that.
Aside from policy, I would just say thank you, thank you, thank you from all the elementary principals and staff members and teachers for the addition of full-time deans. It has been a game changer. So thank you for that support. Did you want to say something?
Chair France, if I may, yes, so to Director Atkinson's question, it just made me think of an opportunity to just kind of bring this forward again. There is a strong desire for us to change our cell phone policy, which is something that we'll be bringing to the board to eliminate the usage of personal smart technology, namely smartphones, smartwatches, earbuds, K8. So I will continually be putting those drips and sound bites out all throughout the summer. That is something that we'll plan to bring to the board in July with a revision draft of the personal use technology policy. So that would be one area I think that will be very helpful as we move forward. And I will just kind of extend my other toe in the door that's open too, to just remind our community about our changes in our dress code policy. I think that's going to be another policy that has some changes that also increases our expectations for how students conduct their dress while they're at school. And I think I love the 3 Ps, namely partnership. I'm not a fashion person, so I know there's a lot of stuff out there that, from my dad lens, I would have issues with. This would help me as a parent to have some conversations where it's no longer just the mean dad. No, look, your school policy doesn't allow this either. So I think that partnership on key aspects of policy, namely these 2 that are some significant changes, that's also going to be a drip that will start coming out next week, and then we'll have some concentrated areas as we ramp up for August, which is right around the corner, folks. Or, sorry, I keep saying August, September, right around the corner, for our families to be responsive to the changes and the supports that we'll be expecting to have in the school system, but also the expectation of supports from our parents to adhere to that.
I had one question, and I know you're probably not prepared to answer this, but with EduClimber and all this behavior data, when we're looking at the whole child, how do you incorporate now this behavior data, let's say, into FastBridge and into the early release days and those discussions and things like that? Can you just kind of give me an example of how this is now being used?
One of the points that I kind of made earlier was we are able to take that usable data, and we've already brought our data to the end of the year to our built team, to our PST team that's working on interventions and looking at next year when we look at goals and outcomes and where do we need some more support, where do we need to be more responsive. So we're already taking the data from this year and really looking at, the different categories. So for example, might be gender, might be where situations are happening. So we're already breaking that down to be able to say, okay, what do we need to do for next year as we roll out this school year to really hit some of those areas that maybe are showing a trend or jumping out. So we're able to utilize that, and we have already done that with 2 of our very big leadership teams.
Could you kind of explain how this also goes into academic outcomes?
For our PST, we were looking at, you can maybe speak to, Katie, to a little bit, when we look at some of the behaviors, we'll look at, it's all encompassing, so we might look at reading scores in FastBridge and MCAs and see if also there's any, I come into PST from a behavioral lens too, so I can bring in that input of whether or not I'm working with the student or where are they are they working in PST because it is a behavior need, and is there a check-in, check-out, so it kind of is twofold.
And one thing that I would say is when you mentioned FastBridge has SABRS, which is, there's 3 different assessments that kids and teachers take. Well, teachers assess students, students assess themselves, and then what we're looking for is any discrepancy in what the student's reporting. And they assess 3 different areas. And the one that's the most useful to us is called school behaviors. I forget the term. But overall, Sabres wasn't giving us very usable data that we could use for our PBIS system, where EduClimber is. Like the bus flags. So does recess, so does lunch. But also, we looked at our data and it was and again, this is just 5 Hawks, but we were having a large number of incidences occur in the classroom. So, and then we also were seeing some discrepancy among gender and discussions around how can we use this data to make sure that every student's experience is the same. Does that answer your question? I don't necessarily have data that can say this is what we did and it impacted learning in this way. I think we're doing other things that are impacting learning. We, across the board, all 7 elementaries, introduced calming corners this year. And last year, we rolled out zones of regulation. And as we continue to build skills in our kids to regulate their emotions and to give them tools to do so, that's actually going to impact their learning more than maybe this large-scale data that we're talking about tonight. Does that make sense?
That's actually what I was asking about.
Okay.
So you answered how it all kind of fits together to create a picture of the whole child.
Yes.
We're not just looking at different
Yes.
pockets. And and I assume that that is probably translated at all levels, at middle school and high school then.
Yeah, and one thing that we do that I don't think that is being used at the middle school or the high school because it's for us is responsive classroom. So PBIS is the whole school, responsive classroom is classroom-centric. We've added zones of regulation and we rolled out calming corners. So there have been some really good supports that we're putting in place at that tier 1 level.
And I'll just chime in at the middle school level too, because I think it really fits in there. When we're doing that early release, those early release days, and our teachers are digging into the data, we've been giving the teachers academic data, but then also attendance and behavior data. So when they are working in those learning teams at grade levels, they have a more full picture, right? So if I'm working with a 7th grader and they're struggling in my class, well, let's pinpoint that reason, right? Is it because of their attendance? Or, oh, look at all of these behavior referrals they're having. So there's some need there that's not being met, right? And that's where we start to work with our teachers then on what are interventions that we can put in place, right? What are those things that we can do to help support whatever skill, that deficit that student has, whatever need they don't have being met over here, to then help them be successful academically in the classroom. And so I think this is an important piece of our data for our teachers because it does help us get that whole child view. Because sometimes it's not that math piece that's hard. It's X, Y, or Z over here that I don't understand how to do this. And so by helping them, again, with emotional regulation, right? Or with realizing that I blurt this much and I'm not paying attention, right? We can have interventions that we can work with staff and students on to help develop those skills.
And I'll just add one last piece at the high school. I think where we do this best is with our 9th grade bar model. In our bar weekly teams, we're having teachers meet weekly, and then administrators, deans, counselors, social workers meet additionally to talk about what our teachers are seeing and the improvements that we've seen as a building in being able to look at the whole child, attendance, academics, and behavior, and how they're all interconnected and where we can plug those right people in. I think that's where we're doing it the best, and our goal is to extend that building-wide. I believe that we started doing that this year in some of our early release time within our learning teams, and we're hoping to continue that work because we're seeing some really great things come from our 9th grade cohort specifically.
I have another question.
I had one more question. I'm sorry. This is what happens when everybody talks and asks really good questions. I think of more. So I remember sitting at flag football one day, back when my kids played flag football, when it was sleeting and raining and they made us play. And I remember saying to myself, I'd love to see the data on Monday morning, you know, the amount of kids that have colds and weren't there because I love flag football. Don't hate me. But I was just like, why are we doing this? But my point is, when you look at the whole child and you look at all of the factors that could be going into these behaviors, I'm wondering about, does your data, are you able to pull things like environmental, like what's going on, and time of day when some of these behaviors are happening, and what's going on in the world, in the school, in life that day. Was it a full moon that day? Was it, you know, like, and I joke, but not kind of, because just like, what was going on? You know, were a bunch of kids staying up late watching the Timberwolves the night before and they're exhausted and so they're going to act out, or whatever the case may be? I'm just kind of wondering, are mechanisms in place with this data to kind of pull environmental factors?
I'm going to
Could be
jump in.
interesting.
I'm going to jump in on the full moon, because yes, that is it's a phenomenon, and it's a
Completely
real
real.
phenomenon in
Yeah.
the school. 20-plus years as a school administrator, I can tell you a full moon has an impact.
Yes.
My colleagues here would agree. But yes, that is part of the analysis of data that was referenced earlier with EduClimber and our ability to look at when, I think it was Katie that was speaking of this, about EduClimber and looking at the data. I knew it was one of you was speaking about this earlier. And how we use that to determine where incidents are occurring, among which collective group, time of day. That's all important data to help us problem solve and decide how best to support the student or students or groups of students around their needs in the behavior area. So most definitely that is data, and data that each of these folks have spoken about, how they bring then to they as an administrative team or a PST team bring to the teacher level as well.
I have one more comment, not a question, but I wanted to just say, I think it was you, Kate, that you mentioned the alignment across the district on how behavior is being dealt with, and I just really appreciate that. And just because you mentioned football, I will always give props to our football program and how it's when there is alignment across, whether it be top down or across, it just builds the strength of the program. I really appreciated that. So however you can continue with this, as you said, this kind of new reporting, but having that alignment from middle school or elementary, middle school, and high school, it makes a big difference because you're dealing with the same thing. And you have all your colleagues that can help give different vantage points and inputs, and I just really appreciate that work that you're putting into it, because behavior is big and it impacts so much. So thank you for all that.
I just have one question.
Please.
You wanna play
It's not about
football?
Is it about
I
football?
seem to have that all handled, and it's not about football. My question is, like we always sit up here and talk about, if it's corporate America, we just buy a new system. And Katie, you had mentioned it at the very beginning that you didn't have a very good system in place, and then we got EduClimber. Is there anything better?
I would say it's serving our purposes. It's been a vast improvement over what we have been using.
Director Burnick, I'll chime in on that too. We are looking at resources, or I should say the tools that our staff have at their disposal to be able to effectively support them in their roles and their leadership to supporting our students with regards to behavior and student engagement. So there's a practicality piece that you heard some of our elementary colleagues speak to about finally leaning in together on a similar platform. We are looking at other platforms as well that might allow for that same practicality and functionality, but enhanced visualizations and or cost savings, because we might build umbrella that under a singular vendor as well. So, bottom line is, we want our staff to have every tool that they can possibly have in their tool belt to supporting our students, while at the same time ensuring that we are maximizing the return on the utility of these tools. And if there's ways that we can find savings and not lose the practicality and the engagement and support, then we'll continually explore that year over year as well.
Any other comments or questions? All right, I want to thank you for the very detailed and robust presentation and the enthusiasm with which you actually presented. That was heartfelt, direct, and extremely helpful to myself. I think others feel the same way. So thank you very, very much for the time and effort you put into this.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you to our team.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So moving on, board governance policy, we have no policies at this time. And then I'm going to go to superintendent relations.
Just want to put out one more plug around two key policy changes that one that we'll be bringing to the board, that you would have to take action on that, but pertaining to cell phones, and another around our dress code, and just really wanting to make sure our community stays in tune with these conversations throughout the summer, as this will have a big impact on our school communities, and that we believe will be a great support in bringing focus back to that instructional core and less distractions. So more to come on that.
For transparency and for clarity, can you give clarification of the timing of those policies, particularly because we don't have our policy committee? And I'm assuming then it has to go through the normal cycle of readings, and because we don't have that policy committee in place right now.
Correct.
So
Right,
if you can give some
so the dress code is already done.
clarification on the timing of
Yeah.
that policy coming forward.
Dress code is already done, so that one's not coming forward. But the cell phone policy that we would like to bring forth to the board, we would bring it forth to the board on July 8th for your first view, and then in August 12th, I believe, for your second view, which we would ask that you take action, and should you be supportive of the action, that would still be in time for the start of the school year. We would also be keeping our current policy committee abreast of these changes so that they could weigh in on some of this along the way, knowing, because we don't officially meet until after August 12th.
Correct.
But just know that this is something that we'll try to do, via email and virtually to get some of that feedback from that committee. I would also say, full disclosure, I feel very strongly about making some significant changes to really address what we are continually hearing on multiple reports about the impacts of personal technology in our classrooms. And I just want to say that it's something that we wanted to make sure that we could bring forth and address, start of next school year. So we will simultaneously be working at each school level to address the handbooks changes that would also be possible. Possible changes that would have to be reflected in those handbooks. So when we do bring it to the board for action and it's something that you would choose to be in support of, then our handbooks would be ready as well. So we're not doing that at the 11th hour. So, and if we don't change, then we have work to be ready to prepare for maybe another conversation of maybe some things that would need to be set in motion or in place before said change could occur. So not to be presumptive, but just wanted to let you know the process of kind of where we're at.
Thank you. I
Director
appreciate that.
Herman?
Yep.
This is a question for Director Herman. In my recollection, we do review the handbooks every year and vote on them.
Chair Franz, that is accurate, and that will be coming forward in August, I believe, is what we determined.
Okay. So that is the student handbook as well as the individual policy that supports the handbook? Or is that the handbook just referencing the individual policy?
Chair Franz, it would be both.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so informational items. I've got a couple here. One is the one that's listed in your agenda item, and that is now that we are going to be completing, hopefully everybody will be completing our self-survey, then normally we discuss those in a retreat. And so our next board meeting is July 8th. And so I am asking if the board would be agreeable to having the second half of that board meeting be a board retreat to discuss the results of our self-evaluation.
I'm open to that.
I would just question why it wouldn't be a study session versus a retreat, especially now knowing that we have a cell phone policy potentially to review as well. Would it make more sense to have it as a study session so that it's recorded for the public? Because a lot of the public doesn't attend meetings in the summertime because they're on vacation, particularly July 8th, because a lot of people are coming back from vacations. So I think for my own, I would prefer it be in a study session versus a retreat. And I'd like to understand why it would be a retreat versus a study session.
Okay, so first of all, when we do a board study session, that is usually on school district business, and it does require staff, et cetera, to be present. When we do a retreat, we don't have to have the staff here because the board self-evaluation, which has nothing to do with the cell phone policy, it is strictly our own survey that has been sent out. We evaluate our effectiveness as a board, and we
I am
speak
clear on
only as
what
a
it is.
board.
Yep.
So that is our own communication, and therefore it does not require staff to be present, so they can be freed up for the night. And we have traditionally done this as a retreat for that purpose, so that staff, board, technology people, et cetera, are not burdened with that particular event. But it is still held in the public. It was a retreat last year, too, a
I saw
retreat the
that.
year before.
I'm aware.
But it is still very much held in the public because we are forming a quorum.
I'm aware. And I guess the only reason I made that comment is because with Dr. Thomas referencing that we'll be reviewing a cell phone policy, my question is that, I guess when I read this, that you said setting a date, I was assuming that it would be a different date than the July 8th date, and was suggesting a study session so that we could do things like review the cell phone policy and then review the self-evaluation. And we have other future agenda topics that haven't been covered that need to be added to the agenda as well that are pending. So I was suggesting a study session versus a board retreat because it sounds like we have some business to cover in
Okay,
July.
Let me, so we could add another study session to cover that business. That wouldn't be an issue, but the retreat is just only for, there's no board business discussed other than our own self-evaluation. So that is singled out on purpose. If the board wants another study session to continue talking about the other business items where the staff is present, then I'd like to kind of bifurcate those two issues and first talk about the retreat. And then if you would like to suggest a study session, then we should discuss that and see if the board wants to do that. But the first question that I have is, does everyone here want to end the board meeting, because remember, July 8th is a board meeting, not a study session, and go into retreat at that time, thereby releasing the staff to talk about the results of our self-survey?
I'd rather pick a different date, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Like, our meetings are getting decently long.
That's
And
fine.
I'd hate to rush through anything on the 8th, and then know that, okay, now we get to the end of that, and we just don't have any more energy to go through a board eval.
I get it.
So, I mean, I know times are hard for people to get together, but if we put a date out there, and that's just my opinion.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Chair France, I forgot to tell you earlier, I will actually be out that week.
Okay. So anybody else?
I mean, I think if we stick to our regular kind of calendaring, a study session would happen on the 22nd anyway. I mean, there's not one now, I know that, but I'm saying, like, if we follow what we usually do every other week, then it would be the 22nd is what I'm saying,
Okay, so
if we wanted to do a study session.
the question that I have on the table, just the first question, is if we don't want to do the retreat after the July 8th board meeting, that's fine. That was my first question. Does the board want me to send out some available dates for a retreat and then do it as a separate setting completely?
Yeah, I think so. I think to Julie,
okay. I
sorry,
think
Director
that makes
Bernick's point that meetings are getting
Right.
long these days and with heavy subjects, so I think
Well, if people are
to save
available on
brain
the
power.
22nd, can't we just have it as a retreat on the 22nd and not have a work
can do
session?
this.
We
Or
could, I
via
could send
email.
that, yeah, I can send that out via email. I will confer with Martha
Okay.
to try and figure out if there's any other barriers for having the meeting and people being out or whatever, and then I will send out some available dates, because we don't actually have to follow. If we're going to do a retreat, we can make it any day.
Right.
So I will just send out a series of dates, and if people want to suggest one, that would be fine. That would be great. Okay, so we will not have a retreat after the board meeting on July 8th, which I am perfectly fine with. And then we had another item that I just want to say for informational purposes, and that's that, as you're aware, I did change the standard response from the board when people come into the board in my role as board chair. So you all received that. That went out a few weeks ago, and we actually got 2 compliments on it from people in the community. So
And I would like to have a conversation. I want to know when board communication protocol is going to be on the agenda, because it's been pending since April, and you have no authority to make that change as a board chair. Board communication protocols were set by the board in 2016 at a November meeting by the entire board, and you as chair have no right or authority to make a single decision to instruct a staff member to make that change, or do you have the authority to change the messaging that's going out to the community that is on behalf of the board? So I believe that we need to get back to what the full board agreed to, which was communicating or discussing board communication protocols, and we need to add it on the agenda so that we can fully discuss this.
we can add it to the agenda. I will tell you that my conversations with the MSBA and our current policy, and the fact that I,
Please
as
point to that
chair,
policy, please.
respond to policy 202.
So where specifically does it say in 202 that you have the authority to change
The chair.
a protocol that is on behalf of the entire board, school board communication protocols? Because
So-
personally, I think the response is rude. It doesn't show that it's a timely response, which since 2016, our board chair has been able to respond in 3 days in a timely and respectful manner. And honestly, Chair France, if you can't do that, then why would you
So
go about
I'm gonna
changing the
ask
protocol?
that- I'm going to ask that we not discuss this now because it's not on our agenda. I have an opinion on it too, and we can save it for that conversation.
Perfect, thank you.
And we can, I assume if all are in favor, add it to our agenda.
Can
It would
absolutely
be
do
the
that.
will of the board. So those who are, you know,
It was an informational item, I wanted to make sure. Most people had already known about it, and it did follow policy, but, and that's why I was bringing it up. So if we want to continue with trying to find a time to add this on there, the add board communication onto a study session, then we should do that.
It's already been approved. It was approved in April. It's been pending since April.
It was pending because of the 3 days.
No, it was
and
the,
it-
I asked for board communication protocols
We can do
to be,
that.
to be
Yes.
on
the board
the agenda.
members want this on the agenda.
We had already-
I mean, we
Fine.
have
We already-
3 people
we
who
already
do.
talked about it.
Okay.
Perfect, okay.
I just appreciate in the meantime that you at least, I don't know, if you have the ability to change it
She doesn't, I'm sorry.
over.
I checked with
we might just-
MSBA as well.
Okay, we might talk about that at our session.
Yes,
though.
we'll talk about
But
that
what I
then.
would say is it's really nice to at least not have a number out there if we're not able to meet that, because people's lives are definitely not as, not everybody has 48 hours in their day, so I appreciate that you're able to just
Thank
at
you.
least take care of something in the meantime until we can get to it, because we do have a lot of other business to get taken care of.
So it's okay to instruct staff to make a change as an individual
I'm
board
not
member?
talking to you about that right now.
Thank you, just curious.
Keep repeating.
So any other future agenda topics on the next area? Anybody else? Okay, with that, we are going to adjourn the study session into a closed meeting for the purpose of discussing negotiation strategy. Since this isn't a formal meeting, we don't have to adjourn, but we do need to clear the room for the closed session.
All right.